Okay, well, it's 8:05. Let's get started. And thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend tonight's webinar called A Comparative Guide to Overseas Property Investing. My name's Richard Lowe. I'm the founder and turnkey of Turn-Keyinvestments, which is a company that helps clients grow their wealth, particularly on the focus of real estate investment. We provide a wide variety of real estate related investments. And tonight we've got a very broad topic, which is a comparative guide to overseas property investing. Now, I have to confess that although I have traveled to all of the countries that we'll be covering tonight, there's no way that an individual can be an expert in all of these countries. And so I just want to really prep those people who are attending tonight that this is very much a high-level overview, so that for those of you who have been considering to invest outside of your home country, it may give you something to consider, something that you hadn't thought about before. And if so, then obviously we'd be delighted to be having a more detailed conversation to help you better understand about that particular country. And if I can't go into the detail that you need to, just because I've been involved with real estate for now about 17 years with a very good network, I can almost certainly assist by referring you to one of my colleagues or partners that would be able to assist in the particular country that you're interested in. So let's get started. I do have a legal disclaimer. I have pulled the information tonight from many different research sources, plus my own personal experience of visiting these countries. When I go to these countries, I'm always looking at the real estate investment opportunities, going to real estate agencies, speaking with developers. So it really is a combination of research documentation, personal experience, but again, it has to be taken that this isn't trying to provide advice, but really to try and give and share my experiences with some research data so that you can make a more informed decision of whether you would like to invest in a different country that you had never even considered before. So why invest in overseas property? Well, diversification is a very basic strategy. Rather than having all your eggs in one basket, it's always a good strategy to diversify so that if one of the places that you're investing in doesn't perform so well, hopefully with diversification, the other places that you do invest in can counter that. If you were to have all your eggs in one basket and that particular property market, for whatever reason, if there's some political change or policy change that has a major impact on the performance, then of course having all of your real estate investments in that country could have a major impact on your overall net worth. Accessing markets offering better returns. Again, hopefully tonight will give some flavor of countries that might be offering better returns than the markets that you're familiar with. Here in Singapore, which is where I'm based, in fact, I didn't mention earlier, but I've lived now in Singapore for 30 years. I've lived in Asia for 32 years. But as you can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK, from Oxford. Having lived in Singapore, I've bought and sold properties here in Singapore, as well as other countries like the UK. One of the things that we do have in Singapore are what we call government cooling measures, and there are various restrictions that have an impact on the real estate market. Some can be a good thing, some maybe not so good if you're an investor and wanting to grow your portfolio in Singapore. But generally speaking, the cooling measures, I think, are done for the good of the majority of the people, so that the average person in Singapore can still hopefully get onto the property ladder. This includes financial restrictions, which I'll go into in just a moment. Other reasons for investing could be that you're relocating to a new country, having got a job, and you'd like to look at that as a longer term. So rather than renting, you decide to buy and invest in a property. It may be you have children that are studying overseas, and again, rather than renting a property, you decide that you'd like to buy something for them to live in, maybe even rent out a few of the rooms to recoup some of the costs for the mortgage if you're paying a mortgage. Or it may be more of a holiday lifestyle retirement property. So there are many different reasons that people may aspire to investing outside of their home country. Now, having been involved with real estate, particularly overseas real estate investment for many years, and spoken probably to thousands of clients, one of the greatest concerns about investing outside of the country you live in is the fear of the unknown. You know, how do I know that this is a good place to invest? And why don't I just invest in where I know? Which makes a lot of logic. If you don't know a place, why would you invest there? And if you do know a place, which is probably where you're living, you feel more comfortable to invest. The challenge I have to that thinking is just because you're familiar with that place doesn't necessarily mean it's the best place to put your hard-earned dollar. Or would there be better places to invest if you just had a little bit more understanding of different property markets so that you can make a well-informed decision of whether it would be worth at least considering investing overseas? You know, there are genuine concerns such as, you know, how do I know it's a good investment? Well, if you don't know that country, you don't really know. And so it has to start somewhere through webinars, potentially like this, that will give you some level of education to giving a better understanding of different property markets. Other concerns, if I'm buying a property that might be thousands of miles away, you know, who will be looking after my property? Well, unlike in Singapore, most countries that have worked in have property management companies. These are specialized companies that will do everything from onboarding you as a client, marketing your property, finding the tenant, negotiating the lease agreement with the rental, getting that person, handing over the keys, getting them settled into the property, managing that property, taking care of repairs and maintenance, collecting your rent, sending it to your bank account. So providing a full service so that even if you're not living in that country, you have a professional property management company that will be looking after your property. I've really answered number 4, how can I find a tenant? Well, the property management company, as part of their services, that's one of the key things that they'll be doing. Other things that are important when investing in property is financing and getting a mortgage. And I work with many mortgage brokers that specialize in the countries that we'll be sharing later. And getting financing, I'm not saying is automatic, but with all the countries that we are going to share tonight, mortgage financing is an option. So you don't necessarily have to be buying in cash. And how can I exit my investment? How can I sell the property? Well, very similar to what we do here in Singapore, we might have an agent that we appoint to market the property. We might be using property portals like Property Guru. Overseas countries, very similar, lots of ways to market the property if you decide at some point in time that you'd like to exit. So some of these perceived barriers to entry, when you understand the services that can be provided, hopefully alleviate some of those concerns and give you an open mind to considering about investing in another country. So I mentioned in Singapore, the government has implemented various cooling measures to try to ensure that the price of property still is obtainable by the average person. Now, if you're a Singaporean, you can buy directly off HDB, the Housing Development Board, and you can buy brand new properties at subsidized rates and have various government grants to get your foot onto the property ladder, of which the vast majority of Singaporeans live in HDB property. When it comes to the private property, so condominiums, landed properties, and so on, then these are, even the HDB is subject to many of these restrictions as well, but again, in order that the government stops the very wealthy effectively buying and owning the majority of the property and potentially driving up prices where it becomes unobtainable for the average person, they have introduced these cooling measures. So some of them are the total debt service ratio, or sometimes referred to as TDSR. And the TDSR basically limits how much you can borrow. So once you've hit a certain percentage of your total monthly income, then you cannot borrow any more money. So it limits how much you can borrow. And in turn, if you were needing to borrow money through a mortgage to buy another property, that could be something that stops you from acquiring another property. For Singaporeans, the loan to value, or the LTV restrictions, are as follows. For your first property, it's you can borrow 75%, and the stamp duty levels are very low for a Singaporean. I think it's 3% for your first property. But if you're going to buy a second property, the loan to value goes from 75% down to just 45%. And the loan to value on a third property is just 35%. So it means that the vast majority of buying a property needs to be bought in cash. A second property, you're going to need to put a 55% cash deposit down and a 65% on a third property. So it's going to be a significant amount of cash, particularly when we look at the prices of properties in Singapore, which are certainly expensive. There's something that was introduced called additional buyer's stamp duty. There is still normal stamp duty, but on top of that, for a second property, a Singaporean would pay an additional 20% stamp duty, and for a third property, it would be 30%. And I feel sorry for foreigners that may be living here, or even foreigners who would like to buy property in Singapore, because the additional buyer stamp duty for a foreigner is actually 60% of the purchase price of the property, not including the basic stamp duty. And if that wasn't enough, if you sell the property within the first 4 years, you will basically get another stamp duty called seller's stamp duty. And this is basically a stamp duty that if you were to sell the property within the first year of buying the property, you would pay a 16% seller's stamp duty, and that goes down each year by 4%. If you're selling in the fourth year, you would pay an additional 4%, and if you sell in the fifth year, then there's no additional seller's stamp duty to sell. Okay, just excuse me one moment. My dog is in the room and basically is scratching the door and wants to get out. Just hold with me one moment. Okay, apologies for that. So, looking at the Singapore property market, it's, I've been here for 30 years, and I suppose I shouldn't be amazed, but I'll just quote an example. Last weekend, just a few days ago, there was a launch in the Science Park region of Singapore. I believe it was called Leiden, I think it's Leiden Gardens. Anyway, the development basically sold 94% of all of the units in the first weekend it got launched, with an average price at around about 2,400 Singapore dollars per square foot. 3-bedroom units, typically between about 1,000 to 1,300 square feet, at prices of around about £2.5 million. So not cheap, and yet flying off the shelves like hotcakes. And I would advocate, especially in a place like Singapore, if you're going to be living here long term, buying and owning your primary residence is a very good thing. And the government makes it, as I said, relatively easy to do so by being able to buy through HDB if you're a Singaporean. And if it is your first property in the private market as well, then again, if it's your primary residence, then the cooling measures and the stamp duties are very low. So getting your first property is something that I would generally recommend. But I have a big question mark when it comes to a second or third property. When we look at this example here, Skyview, which is something that was launched, I believe it was last year in Ang Mo Kio, and a very central location. The take-up rate was very good. And I'm just showing this as an example of an entry-level private property condominium. And when I say entry level, I mean the price point, give or take a little bit, $1 million Singapore dollars is pretty much now the entry level for a Singapore condo. This is like a 1-bedroom unit. But let's look at this, assuming that we're looking at this as a second property, an investment property, something that we want to get an income from, something that we would like to grow our net worth over the medium to long term. Let's just have a quick look at some of these numbers and ask ourselves, is this a good to invest, or is there somewhere that might be better? So when we look at this property, the $1 million Singapore dollars, it's estimated that the monthly mortgage repayments, if you can see it in rather small print under the $1 million, is estimated at $3,580 per month to service that mortgage. And over on the right-hand side, I took an average asking rental for a 1-bedroom unit in this development. And the rental income is estimated at $3,480. So we can see the rental income that's estimated isn't even enough to cover the monthly mortgage. And that doesn't include things like the maintenance fees, void periods, paying agency fees, repairs and maintenance, and so on. So immediately when I look at something like this, I have to question from a cash flow point of view, almost certainly, if I was renting this out, then I'm going to have to be paying every month a top up on that mortgage. So effectively, I'm bleeding money every single month. And I'm hoping that in the medium to long term that the price of the property goes up. But what might happen? Who knows? If the economy turns, and here in Singapore, the vast majority of tenants tend to be foreigners. And if the economy turns and there are less foreigners, you may end up finding that you don't have a tenant. You still have a very large mortgage to pay. And if you can't service that mortgage because you've got no rental income, then you may be defaulting. And, that would be an absolute disaster. So when we look at this from a cash flow point of view, it really doesn't look very good. Now, when it comes to the amount of cash I would need to buy just an entry-level condo, go back to the additional buyer's stamp duties and the loan to value. If you remember, on a second property, a Singaporean can only get a 45% loan to value. So that means on $1 million property, they're having to put a 55% deposit of 550,000 Singapore dollars cash deposit, in addition to the 20% additional buyer stamp duty on a second property. Means you're up at 750,000 Singapore dollars of cash on a $1 million entry-level condo in Singapore. Now, this might blow your mind, but roughly speaking, for every 100,000 Singapore dollars, you could buy one property in cash in the UK, giving you potentially 8, 9, 10% net yields. So for the same amount of cash, I could buy 6, 7 properties in the UK, spread the risk across a portfolio of properties, and have a very strong positive net cash flow every single year and every single month. And over time, the value of my portfolio would go up as well. So I just share that up front within the presentation today, so that people think, well, okay, I know Singapore, this is where I live, and if I'm going to invest in property, I'll invest in where I know. But again, I share this with you so that it opens up people's minds to other opportunities. Now, for a lot of people here in Singapore, where's the next best place that they know? And it's our neighbors in Malaysia. And relatively speaking, the prices of property in Malaysia to Singapore seem very, very affordable. I mean, here we've got a condominium. It's the R&F Princess Cove condominium right at the edge of the Woodlands causeway going from Singapore to Johor Bahru. So really very good location, very convenient to be able to access Singapore, and you're pretty much in the city center of Johor Bahru. And this condo, it's a small one-bedroom unit with an asking price of 600,000 ringgit, which is less than 200,000 Singapore dollars. But let's have a look at the numbers. The estimated mortgage repayments per month are 2,578 ringgit per month. And over towards the left, the estimated rental per month is 2,400. So again, what we see here is the fact that even the rent, not including void periods, repair and maintenances and so on, the rent alone doesn't even cover the mortgage. The gross rental yield is estimated at 4.8%, and this particular agent has actually said the net yield is at 3%, which I really don't understand, seeing that the rental income doesn't even cover the mortgage. So the net yield basically is less than zero. It's negative, and you're going to be needing to top up the cash flow. One of the other concerns I have for buying a property in Malaysia is the fact that even though it might appear very affordable, is it a good investment if you can't get a tenant? And when we look at the vacancy rates in a moment and the supply demand, I go over to JB on a regular basis. I play golf there, and it amazes me when I look at some of the condos at night time, more than 50% of the lights are not on. When I play at various golf courses like Horizon Hills, it looks like the vast majority of the properties, even in a lovely gated community with a great golf course and clubhouse, the majority of units are not being occupied. Here's an example of a terraced 4-bedroom unit in Horizon Hills. Asking price is 1,500 ringgit. The estimated repayment on that mortgage is 6,445 per month, but yet the rent is just 3,300 per month, which in Singapore terms is about 1,000 Singapore dollars a month. And so again, it looks like even if you could get a tenant, the fact that there is so much supply there that the rental market is very much in the tenants' advantage, and they can rent for 1,000 Singapore dollars a nice 4-bedroom terraced house in a lovely gated community. But again, is it a good investment? Just because I know it, I've been there, are you going to be getting the returns that you want? Looking at these numbers, assuming you can even get a tenant, they don't look very exciting. Worse still, you might be in a situation whereby if you can't get a tenant, you might think about trying to offload it and sell it. Well, if you've got such a huge oversupply, and you're competing against brand new units from developers, you might even be in a situation whereby you can't find a buyer, or if you can, you're going to be having to sell it at a major discount price, and then you've lost money. So again, the question is, why are you buying this property? And if it's for an investment, again, there has to be a question mark on the motive to buy it just because I know it. Now, it's not easy to get data for vacancy rates in Malaysia. This was the best I could find. The Malaysian residential property vacancy rate is at 19.4%. That was taken from was found in the official 2020 census, which recorded the housing vacancy rate. I also question how accurate that is. Just again, when I look at the number of units that seem to be vacant when I go over to JB. Now, JB doesn't necessarily represent the whole of Malaysia, but I do go up to Kuala Lumpur on a regular basis, meeting clients up there. And I also find that a lot of the condominiums do seem to have a lot of lights turned off and, again, high vacancy rates. And at 19.4%, assuming that was accurate or is accurate, that's 1 in 5 units that are basically empty. Okay, so for those of you who've just recently dialed in, I'm going to be covering about 7 countries: the UK, Germany, Dubai, Japan, Thailand, Australia, and New Zealand. And at a very high level, I'm going to be comparing some of the pros and cons of investing into these different countries. I picked these countries, one, because I've had some exposure of selling properties in these countries over the years. I've also picked these countries because they tend to be countries that are on the radar for people who live in Singapore and Malaysia, and countries that historically they have invested in. So let's start off with the UK. And again, I have to sort of flag this up that I'm trying to use my years of experience and research to give you a very high level overview of potential reasons why you might want to invest and why you might not want to invest. I'm most knowledgeable in the UK property market, which is where I'm from, but I'm not an expert in all of these countries. But I do know a lot of people, so that if I don't have the answer to the questions, I can lean on the people that I do know in my network to get those answers for you. So let's start with the UK. I was there, in fact, I came back just a couple of weeks ago, having spent 1 month going from literally the south coast, from Portsmouth, famous naval base on the south coast of England. Spent several days in London looking at lots of developments, going up to places like Oxford, Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Edinburgh, and all the way up to Inverness, and even further up from Inverness, and have covered a lot of the UK in a 1 month period of time. And I was actually pleasantly surprised about the general buzz in many of the cities, particularly London, Manchester, Edinburgh, had a real energy about them, despite some of the challenges the government has had since being elected about a year ago. Overall, I found it, being a positive place. Now, the UK is a country that a lot of people, if they're going to invest outside of Singapore, Malaysia, is in a country that they're more often comfortable with. It may be that they've been on holiday there, they may have studied there, or maybe they've worked there for an extended period of time. There are things that we have in common, the British rule of law and the old colonial connections. With the UK property market, one of the key drivers for an investment perspective is the huge undersupply and the strong population growth. Now, it's estimated in the UK that 300,000 units need to be delivered every single year in order to keep up with the supply. However, over the last 30 years, in no one year have developers and the government been able to deliver anything like that. It's averaged at about 169,000. I think the best year was about 250,000, but every year it falls short of hitting those targets. The UK population continues to grow, and because of this supply-demand imbalance, what we see in most of the major cities is a very low vacancy rate. And what we mean by that is the number of empty units sits at between 1% to 2% across the key cities in the UK. Now, there are no restrictions on financing multiple properties, so we don't have the TDSR in the UK. So in theory, if you can raise the money to put the deposit down, in theory, you can potentially get a mortgage for 1 or 2 properties. any number of units and there's no restrictions. That would enable you to grow a significant portfolio. Another quite unique thing to the UK is interest-only mortgages. With an interest-only mortgage, you are only servicing the interest on that mortgage. You're not paying down any principal. Now, if it was your primary residence, I would strongly recommend taking a principal and interest mortgage, because if it's your primary residence and in your retirement years, you don't want to still be servicing interest. You want to have fully paid off that mortgage so that you are debt-free when it comes to your golden years. But if it's a investment property where you're not intending to live in it and at some point probably sell it for a capital gain, one of the major benefits of interest-only mortgages means that by just servicing the interest and not paying down the principal, is the amount that you have to service on that mortgage each month is significantly less, which gives you, generally speaking, a very positive cash flow every single month. And many of these mortgages still give you the flexibility that if you wish to pay down some of your principal, you can do so each year. So you're now in control of your cash. You can decide to pay down principal each year, or you could look to reinvest some of that cash and even increase the returns on the money that you've put into that property. Now, in the UK, I found it one of the best countries in terms of the strength of the yields. In London, we're looking at the lower end there, maybe 4 to 5% yields. In cities like Birmingham, Manchester, Liverpool, Leeds, typically somewhere between 5.5% to 7% yields. And in other forms of real estate properties, whether those are short-term lets, HMOs, which stands for houses of multiple occupancy, UK government-funded social housing, you can easily be achieving 8, 9, 10, 12% yield. So very good, well-performing, income-generating properties there. The capital growth has been very consistent. It's a very smooth market, not volatile. The biggest drop in prices over the last 30 years was during the global financial crisis. Properties dropped on average by about 18%, but quickly recovered. But apart from that blip, it's pretty much a straight line of consistent growth. So it's not going to be you're suddenly doubling your money in 2, 3, 4 years in terms of capital growth, but you'll get decent yields on the right properties, of course, with good, steady capital growth. And this might blow people away here in Singapore, but I have access to properties that can start from as little as £65,000, which is about 112,000 Singapore dollars. And really, you could hardly buy the front door of a property here in Singapore for that kind of price point. And again, I say this because a lot of people will just say, well, I don't have enough money to be able to invest in property. Well, that's probably because you're putting into context how much it costs and how much cash you need to buy a second or third property in Singapore. But that isn't necessarily the case overseas, and in this case, in the UK. Now, some of the cons to the UK are the fact that mortgage application process can be a lengthy and time-consuming process. So anybody who has invested in a property, you know, it can take anywhere from, who knows, 2 to 4 months to be able to get your mortgage application approved. So that is quite a long time. Something I refer to as mortgage risk. If you're buying an off-plan property, and let's say you've bought it 2 years before the completion date, or TOP in Singapore jargon, you could go to a mortgage broker and they could give you a potential approval in principle. But in the UK, you can only put a formal mortgage application in within 6 months of TOP or completion date, which basically means if you've signed a sales and purchase agreement 2 years prior to the TOP, you are legally binding yourself to buy that property, but you can only know 6 months prior to the completion date whether you will actually have a formal mortgage offer. Again, you can reduce the risk by getting an approval in principle, but there's always a potential that at the time you do an approval in principle to the time that you need to actually apply for the mortgage, maybe your job situation has changed or something else has impacted your ability to be able to get a mortgage approval. Now, Germany, I haven't been there for 5 years, but I have been involved with selling German and in particular Berlin property for almost 10 years now. And it's been a very interesting and exciting place, particularly Berlin. And the reason being is that when I was a young boy, Germany was two countries. We had East and West Germany. And East Germany was part of the Soviet bloc and communist. And the economy was obviously very different. But when it unified and became one country, a lot of the East Germany had to play catch up. Now, Germany is the strongest economy in Europe, and Berlin is the capital city and the second largest city in Europe. But prices of property in Berlin, compared with other major capital cities in Europe, is significantly lower, partly because of the dynamics of what have happened during the communist times. When the two countries unified, East Germany and Berlin had unemployment rates up at 19%. Now, that has radically changed since the countries have unified, but it has presented some opportunities where the entry-level price points are significantly lower than some of the other German cities and a lot lower than other major cities like London and Paris, as an example. So what we've seen in Berlin is a very strong capital growth over the last 10 years, averaging almost 9% compounded per year. It has slowed down a little bit in the last couple of years since interest rates went up. Although with interest rates coming down again, it looks like because of the huge undersupply and the strong population growth in Berlin, that there should be a very strong rebound. Now, we can see in the vacancy rates at 1% and below, that there is just a massive, massive undersupply of property, which is not great if you're looking to become a tenant, because quite often you can have long queues of people queuing up to try and rent a property. But it's a very good position to be in if you are a landlord and wanting to rent out your property. Now, Germany rewards people who own property, whereby if you hold on to the property for 10 years or more, then when you sell it, there is no capital gains tax. Now, that's very uncommon in European countries. Singapore is blessed with no capital gains tax. Again, it's quite a rarity, but it does mean that in Berlin, when you're getting very attractive capital growth and you're willing to hold for 10 years, you can realize 100% of your profits, which can be quite significant with strong capital growth. Mortgages can be fixed at the moment for about 3.9% for 10 years. So your major outgoing is something that you know exactly what it will be. And most expenses in Germany can be offset from the income. So you can reduce your income tax liability to pretty much zero in the first few years. And as I mentioned, the price points in Berlin can be as little as like 300,000 euros or about 450,000 Singapore dollars for, the capital city of the strongest economy in Europe. And you can be easily looking at probably double that for central locations in places like London and Paris. Now, some of the cons, holding period is recommended for at least 10 years to benefit from the zero capital gains tax. So it's a positive and a negative. It does mean that if you're going to go into a German property, I would recommend looking at it in the long term, because there is a major benefit of no capital gains after 10 years. But for some people, that may be just too long. And so that could be a deal breaker. Now, some people have heard of the rent restrictions on properties in Germany, and particularly in Berlin. It is true. something like 90 odd percent of Berlin is rent property. Germany is very much a culture of renters, which is very different from the UK mindset, which is primarily looking to buy and own the property. And because sometimes properties may have been rented for generations, there are some rent controls. However, if you buy a property built after the year of 2014, the rent controls don't apply. So when a tenant leaves, you can then review the rent based on market conditions and revise the rent in line with market conditions. Okay, let's move on to Dubai in the UAE. So I was in Dubai about 8 months ago. I hadn't been there for about 20 years, and my goodness, it's a city that's going through rapid change. It's extremely dynamic, growing all the time. And, this is reflective in what's happening there at the moment. When we look at the real estate market, it has gone through a bit of a roller coaster at times. I remember back in the global financial crisis, Dubai property got hit very hard, and within almost 12 months or so, property prices plunged by about 50%. I think a lot of people were leaving. There were some challenges. But there seem to be some significant differences now that the government have really brought in a whole variety of initiatives to strengthen and grow the population and encourage people to come and make Dubai their homes for the long term, as opposed to historically an expatriate going there, working for 2 or 3 years, saving as much as they can because there's no tax, and then leaving again. I should add that Dubai, the indigenous population, the Emiratis, only make up about 10% of the population. The rest are a mishmash of expatriates from all over the world. So what's happened in Dubai recently? Well, what we've seen with these government initiatives, particularly things like the golden visa, which is now obtainable by buying a property of 2 million dirham, which is about just under 700,000 Singapore dollars, can get you a golden visa for 10 years. On top of that, even though the price is roughly a minimum purchase of 700,000, you can still apply for a mortgage and finance 60%. So you only need to put 40% of that cash in order to obtain a golden visa. As I mentioned before, in Dubai, it's very tax friendly. There's no property tax, income tax, or capital gains tax. So on your property, you're going to realize 100% of the uplift. As a result of significant population growth and the continued projected population growth from 4 million as it stands today to a projected 7.8 million in 2040, the capital growth has been quite phenomenal, especially in the last 1 or 2 years. In fact, the year-on-year capital growth was estimated at 16.5%. It's got a massively expanding economy. It's becoming more and more of a popular tourist destination. It already has an incredible airport, but is actually building, I believe, what is going to be the biggest airport in the world. It'd be becoming more and more of a popular stop-off point between people flying from Europe through to the Far East and Australia, New Zealand. And it's just been really an incredible success story. Now, I think because of the favorable migration, golden visa, attractive tax jurisdiction, what we saw last year was 6,700 millionaires migrating to Dubai. That was the highest number of millionaires migrating to any country last year. In fact, almost double the USA, which came in at number 2 in terms of number of millionaires migrating to that particular country. So it's obviously doing something right and attracting, the wealthy people into Dubai. And what I'm told, and when I was there, is that these millionaires are looking to buy properties typically at the upper end of the market, and it is at that end of the market that has been doing extremely well. Even though price points can start from as little as 650,000 dirham or about 226,000 Singapore dollar. So what's the downside of Dubai? Well, there isn't much really at the moment that I can tell. I think the one thing that I have concerns about is with the Middle Eastern conflict and unrest that's going on at the moment, could Dubai get affected? Would it be an area that people are less prone to moving and migrating to because it gets caught up in the Middle Eastern wider regional conflict? And if that were to happen, I'm sure that that would have a major impact on the migration boom and in turn, the growth of its economy and the real estate market as well. So again, I don't see too many downsides at the moment, but who knows how things are going to unfold in the Middle East. Now, Japan is a country that I've traveled to many times over the years. In fact, I was there just in March of this year. I was in Tokyo and then skiing for a few days in the mountains. Last year, I was in Osaka looking at lots of developments, and also in Niseko, which has become a very popular international ski resort because of the quality of its snow. Japan, I believe, seems to have a very strong pulling power from Singaporeans and other Asian communities. It's a very unique culture with its very clear identity, food and language, and it's become just about, I think, the #1 tourist destination globally for people to travel to. Now, when I look at Japan as an investment case, there is, as I say, a strong pulling power from Singaporeans. When I crunch the numbers, though, it's a very steady market, but nothing hugely impactful. Could I put my money into a country and hopefully get higher returns? I think I probably could. But again, it depends on what you're looking for in your investment and what you want to get out of it. So the capital growth rates have been averaging around about 4% per annum for the last 5 years. One thing it has is an amazing exchange rate, especially again for Singaporeans. The Sing dollar is up by approximately 48% against the yen in the last 5 years. And, I think I first went to Japan over 32 years ago. And most of the time I've been to Japan over those years, I always felt it was an expensive country. But the last 2 times I've been there, just because of the strength of the Sing dollar against the yen, it actually seemed very affordable. And I think that's, again, one of the things that may be driving tourism there as well, that it is far more affordable for a lot of countries due to the weak yen at the moment. Japan also has very low interest rates, which is also good for borrowing. It's a very stable and mature property market. I mentioned about the tourism, and through the very high levels of tourism is driving the need for short-term accommodation. So I noticed also this weekend, Savills here in Singapore were selling an Osaka property, which is like an Airbnb bed and breakfast style accommodation. The whole thing sold out. A very affordable price point, 120 to I think 150,000 Singapore dollars, and on short-term lets, getting a decent yield. Japan and Osaka is already experiencing very good tourism, but that's, I think, inflated even more so because Osaka is presently hosting the World Expo between April to October of this year, which is boosting even more people to the city and creating a higher need for the short-term accommodation. It's also synonymous as being a safe country. Acquisition costs typically for a new build property are as low as 2 or 3%. So that's, very different, compared with here in Singapore, where it might be anywhere from 20 to 60% depending on your residency. And entry-level properties in Osaka starting from about 17.5 million yen. We've been launching properties at the lower end at about 150,000 Singapore dollars. So price point wise, again, relative to Singapore, very attractive. So what are some of the downsides to Japan? Well, the yields aren't particularly exciting. We're looking at 2 to 4% yields. You're looking in Tokyo around about 2 to 3% yields, and maybe 3 to 4% yields in places like Osaka. These are on what I call traditional tenancy agreements, so 2-3 year tenancy agreements. They can be a lot higher for the short-term holiday kind of lets. But I think an important thing to flag up with these Airbnb style of properties is that even though you can buy a small, 20, 30 square meter unit for less than 150,000 Singapore dollars and get a decent yield, you have to think about what is the exit. Now, I know from my Japanese colleagues that very few people living in Japan would buy a unit that is primarily in a condominium with short-term lets with people constantly coming and going. So you pretty much take out the whole of the domestic market, which basically means if you're going to resell this kind of property, you're really looking for another investor. Now, I'm not saying that's going to be impossible, but you do need to think about, okay, it may be an affordable, it may be a good yield, but what is my exit strategy? If I need to get out and I want to get out, can I actually sell the property? Now, Thailand is a very popular place and geographically very close to Singapore and Malaysia. I was there in late February, early March, in fact, just about 10 days before the earthquake happened in Myanmar and the knock-on effect that Bangkok suffered, whereby there was fairly extensive damage to a lot of buildings. There was obviously the incident that was very unfortunate where one building actually collapsed and there was a lot of people that died, but structurally there was quite a lot of damage. But that said, Thailand, I think most people love Thailand, very popular tourist destination, has a low cost of living. It has a very attractive culture, food, well known for friendly people, and has become a popular retirement location with attractive long-term visas. Now, in Bangkok, I've heard of people who bought, high-end condominiums 10 years ago and have done extremely well. Closer to present day, though, what appears to have happened is that over time there has been a building frenzy. In fact, I first went to Bangkok in 1990, and when I was there again a few months ago, I was really blown away of within 35 years or so, the incredible change that Bangkok has experienced, becoming a very modern cosmopolitan city. It has shopping malls that certainly can rival some of the best shopping malls here in Singapore. Incredible skyscraper buildings. I visited the Ritz-Carlton Residency, which is an iconic building in the center of Bangkok that looks a little bit like a Lego or a Jenga collection of blocks, but very striking building. So it's a country and an economy and a city that's gone through massive changes over the years. But I do have some concerns because there has been a significant amount of build, but that could be a blessing as well, insofar that with quite a high supply, together with the challenges that they've faced with the recent earthquake tremors, is that developers are willing to do some really good deals at the moment. So getting in there, if you are looking for the right reasons, to buy into the Bangkok and Thailand market, potentially now is a good time to do some deals. There are low acquisition and exit costs. So for new build properties, round about, stamp duty is at 0.5 and land registry is at 2%. So pretty attractive relative to many other countries. And entry-level properties in Bangkok starting from 10 million baht or about 395,000 Sing, and in Phuket 5 million baht or about 197. Now, I should flag up with all of these prices, I'm sure that if you look hard enough, you could find things that are cheaper. I'm providing sort of some guideline ballpark figures for entry-level properties that I can get access to in these countries. So when it comes to Thailand, getting hold of some accurate data is not so easy, but the general consensus, particularly in Bangkok, is that in certain sectors of the market, there is quite an oversupply. There's high vacancy rates. Again, this changes significantly from one location to another in Bangkok, but is estimated as high as 18% vacancy rate. So not far off, some of the vacancy rates we had in Thailand, in Malaysia. The yields aren't particularly exciting, and it's one of the countries that has limited financing options with higher interest rates. So moving to Australia, a country that in the last few years I've actually traveled to quite a lot. My eldest daughter is studying medicine at the University of New South Wales. And so I've been visiting there and traveling around Australia quite a lot in the last couple of years since she has started her studies there. It is a country that I've been to multiple times over the years. I do enjoy Australia. I think a lot of people like it, again, for it's synonymous with a good climate, good quality of life, lots of open spaces, good food. The Aussies generally pretty laid back, easygoing people. So it's a popular destination, and geographically you can fly to Perth from Singapore in 5 hours. Sydney's about 7 hours as well. And we've seen that in recent years, capital growth has been very strong at an estimated 10% per annum for the last 5 years, with a 54% rental growth in the last 5 years. So again, over 10% per annum rental growth. Yields, between 3 to 6% rental yields, and also a very attractive exchange rate. Fortunately for me, who's paying some significant education fees at the moment, I'm very glad to say that the Sing dollar is up approximately 15% against the Australian dollar in the last 5 years and 20% in the last 10 years. It also has a very stable, mature property market, and is a very popular destination for students, particularly from Asia, with excellent universities. In fact, when I go on the campus of the University of New South Wales, at a rough estimate, I would say that 80% of the students are at least Asian faces. And I believe something like 40% of foreign students, predominantly from Asia, and there's a lot of Australian-born Asians there as well. But it's a significant industry in Australia that has quite an impact on their economy, is the foreign student and the education market that they have there. And of course, wealthy students can be some of your potential tenant pools as well. Entry-level properties in Melbourne and Perth, starting from about 550,000 to 600,000 Australian dollars, which in Sing dollars is between about 456 to 480,000. So some of the cons to Australia, taxes are relatively high. So when you combine the stamp duty that you pay, income tax and capital gains tax, even though they've had very strong capital growth and rental growth, when I crunch the numbers, I do ask myself the question, could I get my dollar working harder for me? Now, again, it does depend. It depends on why you're going to buy there. If you're going to relocate there and you want to buy a property there, that makes perfect sense. But maybe I impose my thoughts too much, where I'm looking at it always as a hard-nosed investment, and I'm looking to try and maximize my returns and manage my risk. I love Australia as a country. It's a beautiful place, and there are some potentially, good returns, but are there some places that could be better? Australia does have an interesting, what we call negative gearing policy, whereby if you have yearly losses whilst you are holding and owning the property, you can actually offset those losses so that when you sell the property, those losses can offset from the capital gains tax. Now, the capital gains tax is pretty hefty, at starting at 30% and quickly going up to 37% capital gains tax, and that doesn't include the income and the stamp duty up front. Those things can be offset, but when you have significant capital gains tax, it can have a major impact on the total ROI, or return on investment, of your property. Now, foreigners can only buy new build properties directly off the developer. They can't buy into the secondary market. And when you want to sell your property, you can only sell your property to an Australian resident. So that does limit, the potential people you can sell to. I think the other thing, which is quite a generalization, is that quite a lot of properties that are sold overseas are quite often apartment blocks in close proximity to the city centres. These can be very popular for rental by students, but very often the Aussie mindset is very much about having a landed property with a garden in the suburbs. And so again, one of the things to consider is, who are you going to sell to? If you have to sell to an Australian resident, then how many Australians are going to be looking at, let's say, downsizing to an apartment block, typically living city centre? So again, just food for thought about your exit strategy. Okay, we're getting close to the end. This is the last country, New Zealand, one of my favourite countries in the whole world. For anybody who loves the outdoor life, it is arguably one of the most beautiful countries in the world, with a great quality of life. It's almost like one big national park. When we look at this from an investment case, it has a very stable government, and is one of the easiest places to do business. It has a population growth combined with a major shortfall of over 100,000 homes, which was due partly to a lack of construction in the 2010s, and has created significant supply-demand imbalance in a country with a relatively small population of just 5.8 million. Now, they have very steady capital growth. The average over the last 30 years has been 6.1%. So when you look at a graph, it really has been very steady growth until the last couple of years, when interest rates went up quite significantly, and we did see property prices for the first time start to take a bit of a decline. Now, that's starting to change as interest rates come down. It does look like the New Zealand market is starting to turn a corner, and so potentially a good time, to look at getting into the property market. 5.5% average annual rental growth over the last 10 years, which is very healthy, and a very favorable tax jurisdiction. So there's no stamp duty on New Zealand properties. There's limited capital gains tax depending on when you sell the property, and there's no inheritance tax as well. So some very favorable tax advantages in New Zealand. And with recent interest rate reductions, the market does look like it's turning a corner. So some of the New Zealand cons, well, it is a very geographically isolated country. That may be in its favour if the world all goes to pot. But, just to fly from Singapore, it's about a 12 to 13 hour flight. That's a similar distance that it is to fly from Singapore to the UK. So it's quite a long way away. It has a relatively small population and economy. And some years ago, it was restricted whereby foreigners couldn't buy into New Zealand property unless you were Australian, and strange enough, Singapore citizens are able to buy into the New Zealand property. And it has proved a very popular country for retirees who want to live out their golden years in a lovely quality of life in a beautiful country. Now, I hope you can read the numbers, and apologies if they're a little bit small, but what I've tried to do is put together a table with some key metrics so that we can kind of do a snapshot and make some comparisons and start to help narrow down, well, if I were to invest, what are my investment goals and which countries may be more likely to achieve those investment goals. So when we look at entry price point, I mean, for a lot of people, just the fact that you need some money to buy a property can be prohibitive. When we look at Singapore, we spoke about buying a second property, entry level at 1 million, and needing at least a 55% deposit of 550,000 of cash plus the ABSD out of another 200,000 means you're looking at 750,000 of cash on a second property. When we look at some of the other countries, the UK, as low as 112,000 Singapore dollars, Japan as well, 153, Thailand 197, and I'm sure there are properties that are less expensive. So from a entry-level affordability, we can see that there are countries that are far more affordable than Singapore. When we look at the average capital growth rates, there are some countries that have really excelled in recent years. So Germany, Dubai, Australia have done extremely well. Parts of Thailand, you can see here capital growth between 2 to 10%. Again, it's quite a fragmented market. In the luxury high end, it's done pretty well in Bangkok, but in other areas, not so well. I think one of the challenges, though, is sometimes we look at the countries that have done extremely well with their capital growth and say, well, okay, we better invest there. But maybe we're coming in at the tail end. And maybe we should look at markets where, we look at the fundamentals and what may be driving potential growth. Countries where it may have been a sluggish market, but with interest rates coming down, more buyers coming into the market, maybe we're going to see some of the countries that have had sluggish markets in recent years, maybe those are the ones that are going to get the best capital growth. When we look at gross yields, the UK definitely is one of the most attractive at 4 to 12%. Dubai estimated at between 6 to 7%. New Zealand between 4 to 8%. So again, various countries giving decent yields and good positive cash flow. Taxes, always something that no one wants to pay, but if you're going to, hopefully as little as possible. Well, when we look across the board, countries like Germany, because of if you're holding for 10 years with no capital gains tax, I put into the low category. Now, this is very, I suppose, general. I've just tried to use a matrix because tax systems and jurisdictions are very complicated from one country to another. So I've just sort of thrown in very arbitrary scale of high, medium, low, and none to give an indication. And again, this is why I have to flag up that partly this is based on research, but partly it's based on opinion as well. So yeah, Germany typically is a fairly favorable tax jurisdiction. Likewise, Thailand is pretty low, and New Zealand as well. Probably the one that really shines out is Dubai, because there are no taxes there, and so you couldn't get more efficient than that. When it comes to vacancy rates, vacancy really is a reflection of the supply demand. And if you've got very low vacancy rates, it means there's a high demand. And as an investor, having countries where you know that there's a very low vacancy rate almost certainly means that you're going to be able to rent out your property very quickly. So countries and major cities in the UK, Berlin, Australia have extremely low vacancy rates. And so once you put your property on the market, as long as you've marketed it at the right price and presenting it properly, you should be able to get the property rented out extremely quickly. And when it comes to mortgage financing, again, it's a great concern, but all the countries I've covered, all of them have access to mortgage financing. Thailand is more limited with the number of lenders, here in Singapore at least, to lending to those countries with fairly high interest rates. And property management, for those of you who are, again, here in Singapore, we don't really have property management companies. It normally is a real estate agent that is kind of doing a pseudo management and looking after your property for you. But in other countries, having a professional property management company that will take care of the property, find the tenant, collect your rent, and do all the work for you is a norm, so that you can have peace of mind that if you do decide to invest in an overseas property, that you've got a professional organization managing your property for you. So that kind of brings me to the end of this particular part of the presentation. What I would like to encourage at this point is just if you would be kind enough to give me some feedback. So I'm not going to hold anybody to this, but from what you've heard about sharing about these different countries, if you were to pick one country that looks the most interesting, would you mind just sharing that in the chat box, which should appear on your screen as a rectangular box with some lines in it? And if you can just put in that box a country that, out of the ones that we've shared, looks the most interesting for you. Now, it will vary from one person to another, but I would really appreciate if you could just put in there a country that shows some interest for you. So thank you, Ange and Funky. Thank you both. I think put UK there. It just gives me some feedback of where you might be thinking to look at, and maybe when we have a conversation, that could be a starting point to look at those kind of properties. So I'll just give a moment for that. And whilst we do that, let me kind of go on to the next slide, because this might impact your decision. So a key question that I asked at the beginning is, are you investing in where you know or where is best? And what I was hoping for tonight is, even though I'm not going into any real depth in any country, because I'm comparing 7 countries and we just don't have time to be able to go in depth. I mean, usually in a webinar, I might cover one city or one country. Here we're covering about 7 countries in one webinar, but giving a high level overview. And what I was hoping is that for people that have always said to themselves, well, I'll only invest in where I know, maybe tonight's webinar has given you a little bit of an eye-opener and food for thought about maybe having a conversation with myself, better understanding about opportunities overseas, so that you can educate yourself to make a well-informed decision of whether to invest in your home country, where you know, or where might be best. And one of the things I always want to get as much clarity on when I meet a client is, be clear in your investment goals. What do you want to achieve from the property? So let's just go back to Johor Bahru. A lot of Singaporeans think, okay, well, let's invest and buy a property in Johor Bahru. Now, if they're buying as an investment, hoping to get a tenant where they can make a positive cash flow, they'll probably very quickly find out that, one, even if they get a tenant, it may not even cover the mortgage. And if they, but there is an even worse scenario that they may not even get a tenant. However, maybe the intention of buying the property in Johor Bahru was to have a weekend property, a holiday property. Maybe it was somewhere that you look to retire to in your golden years. And if you go out with the right intention, and buy for the right reasons, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But if you go into a market with the intention that this is an investment property, I want to make a positive cash flow, I'm hoping that I will get a capital growth over time, and you go into the wrong market, it could be a very, very expensive mistake. Okay. Now, something that this webinar was always going to sort of dovetail into is this JLL Global Property Expo, which is here at Marina Bay Sands Expo and Convention Center this weekend from the 18th to the 20th of July. Now, this is the inaugural launch of this event via JLL. Now, for those of you who don't know, I hold my real estate sales license with JLL. And this is a 3-day event where we'll be having 35 to 40 developers from all over the world displaying their developments. Most of the countries that I think, in fact, all of the countries that I've covered today, there will be developers from those countries. And we will be having over 60 speakers talking on all sorts of topics, panel discussions, so that if you are wanting to educate yourselves, get more familiar with investing in overseas property market, there is no better opportunity. It's free of charge and you can register now. So in the chat box, we are going to put a link so that you can copy and paste that link, and that should take you to a landing page so that you can register for this 3-day free event, so that, again, it's going to enable you to educate yourselves to becoming more familiar with overseas properties and speak to the developers themselves. I will be at the event all 3 days. I would ask you to come and see me. I will be around most of the time. There's a big JLL stand right in the middle of the exhibition center. From memory, it is in basement 2 in halls D and E. And the doors open each day at 10 o'clock in the morning to 8 o'clock in the evening. It's basically people flying in from all over the world, both the exhibitors and attendees as well. So do click on the link that we've just put into the chat box, and you can register and effectively get free entry to the event. And again, please do come and see me. I'd be delighted to have a chat, get to know you better, and we can focus in on some of the properties and countries that you'd like to zoom in on. So that brings me to the end of the presentation tonight. What I would like to encourage again is some question and answers. You can see my contact details hopefully on the last slide there, but I would like to encourage any question and answers. I will do my best to answer, but because it's such a broad topic, if I can't give you an accurate answer, I'll make a note of it, and I will speak with people who basically are specialists in those countries to get the answers for you. So it's broad, it's wide, and I'm under pressure, but we'll be delighted to do my very best to answer the questions. So if you do have any questions, please put those into the chat box and I'll be delighted to help. Maybe it's so broad you don't know where to start with asking questions. But if somebody's good enough to kick off with a question and break the ice, that would be very much appreciated. Maybe you're all busy registering for the event. Okay, so first question. For investing in Japan, is there any difference if done as an individual or through a company? Yes, there are. And I have actually a nice presentation from a tax consultant who is based here in Singapore. I can send you those slides because I can't give you all the data and pros and cons because there's a lot of difference. But I can send you a slide deck which shares the pros and cons of investing through company structure as opposed to your individual name. So yes, I can answer that, or at least I can send you information that will give you a good insight. And if you would like to arrange a meeting with the consultant, again, he's Japanese national, but speaks very good English and is based here in Singapore. Any other questions I can help with? Oh, thank you. Thank you for attending. Thank you very much. For Singaporeans who buy a second property, they are subject to the ABSD. What if they invest a second property abroad? Are they still subject to ABSD? Okay. So if you buy an overseas property, that property is subject to the taxes in that country. So Singapore government could not impose ABSD on, let's say you're buying a property, a second property in Japan. So the answer is no. If I've understood the question correctly, they cannot impose ABSD on a foreign property. So in somewhere like New Zealand, there is no stamp duty. Likewise in UAE and Dubai, no stamp duty. The Dubai properties, are they still tax-free for non-residents? Absolutely, yes. So whether you are resident, non-resident, the properties are tax-free. So again, I'd just like to remind, I've got my contact details on that last slide. I've given a very high-level overview to many different countries. How I like to work with clients is to meet up with you on a one-to-one basis, clearly understand where you are today, where you want to get to in the future, what your investment goals are, your time horizon, your risk appetite. And I do have literally hundreds of different kinds of real estate investments, from the traditional buying and owning a property where you're renting it out and getting a rental income and hopefully capital growth. But I also have other alternative investments, whether they're in real estate bonds, UK government funded social housing, supported living, which has a very profound positive impact on vulnerable people. Property prices can start from just over 100,000 Singapore dollars, giving 9% net yields. So I have lots of different opportunities. Some clients are looking to own property and want a medium to long-term investment. Other people like real estate, but they might like something shorter with a fixed income return of 12, 15% annualized returns over a 1 to 2 year term. Again, it's all about understanding you as a client and how you see real estate fitting into your overall investment portfolio. Another question there, are there capital gains tax when you sell Japan properties? Yes, there are. Again, that will be in the slides that I can give to you. But again, there are certain things that can be offset. And generally speaking, from a tax perspective, Japan is reasonably good relative to other countries where it could be a lot higher. Okay, I'll just hold on for 1 more minute just to see if there are any more questions. And if there aren't, then, I do thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules. I hope that it's helped open your eyes to potential countries that you may not have thought about. I'd like to again encourage, if you want to take it a step further, to either arrange a time that you can meet myself, come along to the JLL Global Property Expo this weekend at Marina Bay Sands, or kill two birds with one stone and see me at the exhibition, so we can have a meeting there or look at the exhibitors and the speakers that will be on hand. Okay, it looks like there are no more questions. Thank you very much, Sadish, for your feedback there. I'm glad you found it helpful. I hope that we can all stay in touch, and I can be of service to you, whether it's now or sometime in the future. Hopefully, we've at least started a relationship, and I'd like to see if we can take it further. So thank you very much for your time. Have a very good evening, wherever you're dialing in from the rest of the world. And I look forward to meeting you, hopefully in the very near future.